One hot summer's day, a fox was strolling through an orchard till he came to a bunch of grapes, just ripening on a vine which had been trained over a lofty branch. "Just the thing to quench my thirst," he said. Drawing back a few paces, he took a run and a jump and just missed the bunch. Turning around again with a 1, 2, 3, he jumped up, but with no greater success. Again and again he tried after the tempting morsel, but at last had to give it up and walked away with his nose in the air, saying, "I am sure they are sour." Do any of you recognize what I just read? This is one of Aesop's fables, the fox and the grapes. And I learned this past week that this fable might be where we get our expression, sour grapes. The fox can't reach the grapes that are on this vine, and so in order to save face, he announces that they're sour anyway. So the phrase sour grapes can be used either literally or figuratively. We can literally eat sour grapes, which is a very unpleasant experience for our taste buds, or we can have sour grapes in a figurative way. For example, let's say I know someone who buys an expensive sports car, one that I've always wanted, but I can't afford. So if I have sour grapes, then I will disparage the car as if it is undesirable. I might say, yeah, it's a pretty car, but it gets terrible gas mileage. Or I might say, well, it breaks down all the time. Sour grapes. The phrase sour grapes shows up a couple of times in the Bible, but not in the way that it is used in Aesop's fable. Apparently, there was a proverb floating around in ancient Israel, repeated many times, and it went like this: "The parents have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge." Now, what does that mean? Well, in the original context in which we find it in the Bible, which is at the time of the Babylonian exile, many people believed that they, the Israelites, were being punished for the sins of past generations. Their parents, that is their ancestors, have eaten sour grapes, that is they have sinned, and now we, the children, are suffering for it. So you get this literal image of parents eating sour grapes and the children tasting it, which is kind of odd, but that's the picture it gives us. So this ancient proverb was a way to put the blame on someone else, namely those generations who lived before them and had messed up things so badly that God decides to punish the current generation. God punishes them, they believe, by sending in the Babylonians to conquer their land, destroy their temple, and to take their people away in exile. This kind of thinking is very convenient, is it not? If bad things happen to you, well, just blame it on your parents or your grandparents or great-grandparents. The parents have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. Now, of course, there's some truth to this proverb, or else it would have never become a proverb in the first place. Sometimes people do suffer the consequences of the actions of previous generations. Sometimes decisions made in previous generations do affect future generations. For example, we hear a lot of talk these days about climate change and global warming and things like that. And most scientists tell us that future generations will suffer for the actions of the past or current generations, especially if we sit on our hands and do nothing. Of course, as I was reminded a few minutes ago, in October, global warming is not that bad, is it? But another example I think we can point out is it has to do with race relations, specifically in this country. Now, this church is located in a community that is known all over the world, fairly or unfairly, as a place of racial tension. Just a few nights ago, My wife and I hosted the parents of Father Merrick Bozick over at St. Stanislaus. We had them over for supper in our home. And I asked them if they had ever heard of Ferguson. And they immediately said yes, that Ferguson is known even in Poland as a place of racial turmoil. Well, social scientists tell us that our racial problems today didn't just come out of nowhere, that they stem from past decisions and actions made by our foreparents in the past. The parents have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. And we could give a lot of different illustrations of that proverb and how true it does play out. The Ten Commandments say it very directly. I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and fourth generations. You know, it's bad enough to be punished for your own iniquities, but if you've got to worry about your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents, then you don't stand a chance, right? I mean, think about it. The thought that God might punish you for something your great-grandparents did on their prom night years ago, that's frightening. What's the use of trying to be good if you're going to pay for the sins of your ancestors anyway, right? Might as well pass along a little divine punishment for your grandchildren someday. Of course, leave it to the Old Testament prophetic tradition to put a damper on things. Both Jeremiah, whom we heard from earlier, and the prophet Ezekiel argue against this proverb about sour grapes. Jeremiah says, in those days, now the days he's talking about are the days after the Babylonian exile when Israel is restored in the land. In those days, they shall no longer say, the parents have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. But all shall die for their own sins. The teeth of everyone who eats sour grapes shall be set on edge. What does he mean here? Well, all he's saying is that we are ultimately responsible for our own actions. We can't just blame our ancestors for every bad thing that happens to us. Ezekiel chapter 18 makes the very same point. Both prophets criticize the sour grapes proverb because it puts all the blame on their ancestors. And yet, as I said, there is truth in that proverb. Sometimes future generations do suffer the consequences of the decisions and actions of previous generations. However, it is also true to say that if we are tasting sour grapes in our mouths, we might be the ones that ate them. If things aren't going well, maybe it's time. I've got grapes in my mouth for some reason. I can't get it out. I ate a whole lot of them this morning in preparation for this sermon. If things aren't going so well, maybe it's time to stop passing the buck to our ancestors as we play the innocent victim. Maybe it's time to look in the mirror if we need someone to blame. So in other words, there's truth on both sides, right? So with all that in mind, even though I've got the ear of many generations in this room, I'm going to talk specifically here now at the end to the younger generations for just a moment. Your parents, grandparents, and all previous generations have made a lot of mistakes. I know I've made some mistakes. Ask my kids. But guess what? You also will make mistakes when you grow up. So yes, we can blame our ancestors for many things that are wrong in our world, such as perhaps the state of the environment or race relations and prejudices and things like that. And in that sense, like the proverb says, our teeth are still on edge. We can also blame them for a world of continuous war and violence, for an economic system that continues to sort of create a huge gap between rich and poor, and a political system that's led to two candidates that can't even think of one good thing to say about the other. I mean, my generation and generations before, we've goofed up in many ways. At the same time, though, our ancestors did a lot of things right, even with all our shortcomings. Even though if you watch the news, you might think everybody hates each other in this country, we really have inherited a country with a lot of promise. And we owe that to the people who have gone before us. If you look around, there are folks in this room, not as many as there used to be, but there are people in this room who are part of what we call the greatest generation. The greatest generation. Just as there is no shortage of changes that need to be made in our world, there is also no shortage of wonderful people and achievements that continue to bless this world. We have been left with a lot of promise. The theme for this Children's Sabbath Sunday is, in fact, Children of Promise. And what this means to me is that those of us who have fewer days ahead than behind believe very strongly that those of you who are just getting started in life have a lot of promise. We believe in you. We hope that you will outdo us in every possible way and that you will leave this place better than how you found it. Sure, you may have inherited some sour grapes from us, but you don't have to eat them. You can spit them out and find better grapes. You don't have to settle for some of the sins of our past. Instead, you can lead us down a new path, one that is filled with more love and peace and justice, because you really are a generation of promise. Our hope is that when you get to be our age, everything will be a whole lot better. And I know that's asking a lot, but we have a lot of confidence in you. Amen.